It all began on a night when the skies over Sycamore Grove split wide open. Thunder rolled like cannon fire, rain battered rooftops, and winds whipped through the neighborhood with a force that left fences shattered and shingles flying. By morning, the manicured lawns and neatly painted homes looked like a disaster zone. Roofs leaked, siding was torn away, and entire trees had crashed onto driveways. For a community so obsessed with appearances, it was devastation on full display. The next day, the HOA called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse. Residents shuffled in, dripping rainwater from their umbrellas, clutching photos of the damage to their homes. They expected reassurance, maybe even a sense of relief that the HOA's emergency fund, a reserve account that every resident had been paying into for years, would finally be put to good use. After all, what was the point of such a fund if not to help homeowners in their time of need? But when Treasurer Marlene Givens, a woman with perfectly lacquered nails and a smile too tight to trust, took the floor, her words dropped like another storm cloud. "I regret to inform everyone that the emergency fund is currently depleted," she said, feigning concern. "Unfortunately, there are no available funds to assist with storm repairs. Each homeowner will need to handle repairs independently." The room erupted in outrage. Neighbors shouted, demanding answers. How could the fund be empty? Residents had paid extra fees for years specifically to ensure help in disasters like this. But Marlene stood her ground, claiming that unforeseen administrative costs and previous emergencies had drained the account. Beside her, HOA President Harold Litton nodded solemnly, as though this lie were gospel truth. In that moment, many neighbors accepted defeat, already calculating how much they would have to borrow for repairs. But not Daniel Mercer. A quiet man in his late 30s with a sharp eye for detail, Daniel wasn't convinced. Something about Marlene's explanation didn't add up. He remembered that the HOA newsletter just a few months ago had boasted about the emergency fund being well prepared for unexpected circumstances. How could it vanish overnight? As the meeting ended in chaos, Daniel sat in the back, staring at Marlene's satisfied expression. He didn't know yet what was wrong, but he felt it in his gut. The HOA wasn't telling the truth, and he was going to find out why. Daniel started small. He revisited old HOA newsletters and financial updates, which residents rarely read closely. He noticed something suspicious. The emergency reserve had been listed at over $400,000 just 6 months ago. There hadn't been any disasters in that time, no payouts, no announcements of major expenditures. So where had the money gone? He reached out to a friend, Kelly, who used to serve briefly on the HOA board before quitting out of frustration. When Daniel asked about Marlene, Kelly hesitated. "Look, I'll just say this, that woman loves money more than she loves air. She always pushed for discretionary spending, but we never got to see receipts. That's part of why I left. She said the treasurer has special discretion under the bylaws, and Harold backed her up every time." That night, Daniel drove past Marlene's house. While most neighbors' homes were still draped in tarps and littered with debris, her property looked untouched, as though the storm hadn't dared lay a hand on it. Fresh flowers bloomed in her yard. But the real surprise came when Daniel noticed a gleaming luxury SUV in her driveway, a brand new model that hadn't been there the week before. His suspicion grew. Where would a retired bookkeeper, whose only current job was being HOA treasurer, suddenly get the money for such a car? The final piece clicked into place when Daniel overheard Marlene bragging at the local cafe about her little getaway down south. She laughed with a friend about her new condo by the beach and how it was worth every penny. Daniel's blood ran cold. The emergency fund hadn't vanished into thin air. It had been stolen. But Daniel knew that suspicion alone wasn't enough. He needed proof, hard evidence that Marlene had embezzled the neighborhood's money. And getting that evidence would mean digging into records the HOA wanted hidden. Daniel began with the HOA's public records. By law, residents had the right to request financial documents, but Marlene had always made it difficult, often delaying access for weeks. Daniel anticipated resistance, so he sent a formal request by certified mail, citing the exact section of state law that required transparency. A week later, Marlene reluctantly handed him a folder of heavily sanitized statements. but she'd underestimated him. Daniel compared the documents with older ones he had saved from past newsletters. Whole sections of expenditures were missing. Where last year's report listed line items in detail, landscaping, security, maintenance, this new version lumped everything under vague terms like miscellaneous operating expenses. Frustrated, Daniel reached out to his cousin, a forensic accountant. Together, they analyzed the few numbers available and found a glaring irregularity: a transfer of $280,000 to a private account labeled Special Trustee Fund. That account, Daniel suspected, didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to Marlene. To confirm, he dug deeper. He visited the county records office, combing through property transactions, and there it was: a beachfront condo purchased in Marlene's name just 2 months earlier for $275,000 cash. The realization hit him like a lightning strike. While his neighbors were patching holes in their roofs and maxing out credit cards to pay contractors, Marlene had taken their emergency fund and used it to buy herself a vacation home. Daniel gathered copies of the documents, bank transfers, property deeds, and old newsletters showing the fund's previous balance. He knew he had enough to expose her, but he also knew the HOA board would try to cover it up. Harold had been her ally from the start. He needed a bigger stage, an audience that couldn't ignore the truth. That's when he decided to call for a special community meeting. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse overflowed with angry residents. Many were still living under tarps, their savings drained, their tempers frayed. Harold tried to start with his usual calming speech about unity in hard times, but Daniel cut him off. "Before we go any further," Daniel said, holding up a folder, "I think the community deserves to know where their money really went." The room fell silent as Daniel walked to the front. He laid out the documents on the projector screen: the bank transfer to the Special Trustee Fund, the property deed for the condo in Marlene's name, and the newsletters that proved the fund had once been flush with cash. Gasps filled the room. Eyes turned toward Marlene, who sat stiff in her chair, her painted smile cracking. "This is theft," Daniel declared. "While we were struggling to repair our homes, our treasurer was using our money to buy herself a beachfront condo. The emergency fund didn't run dry. It was drained by her." Marlene sputtered, her face red. She claimed the condo was a private investment and the bank transfer was a legitimate reallocation of funds. But the residents weren't buying it. One by one, they stood and shouted, demanding her resignation. Even Harold couldn't calm the storm this time. Finally, someone shouted what everyone was thinking: "Call the police!" Within days, law enforcement got involved. Marlene was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her condo was seized as evidence. Harold, who had looked the other way for too long, was forced out as president. As for the neighborhood, it wasn't easy rebuilding trust, or their homes. But thanks to Daniel's persistence, the truth came out. The community held new elections, and this time they chose leaders who pledged full transparency. Daniel himself refused to run. He wasn't in it for power. He just wanted to make sure no one ever stole from his neighbors again. And though the scars of the storm lingered, so did the memory of the heist and the man who stopped it. For Sycamore Grove, the real damage hadn't been caused by wind or rain. It had been caused by greed. But in the end, justice had the final word.